The 205th edition of the Roy's Boys podcast starts right now.
Carolina basketball family is the strongest there's ever been, there ever will be.
Nate Humphrey hands King Rice the ball. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Dive off the glass. Oklahoma calls timeout. But the game is over. The game is over. Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma. Been ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered by Vinny.
With 20 seconds left to play. Goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good! 63, 62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Brent Brown looking. Throw away to Worthy. 35. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship. Carolina with foul. He takes the timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul.
Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebound. It's over. Carolina has won the national championship. And how about the Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
The Tar Heels are the national dadgum champions.
And that's what it takes when you big time games. You've got to compete. You do it with your brain, and you got to do it with your heart too. And that's pretty doggone good.
From QCBroadcasting.com, this is the Roy's Boys podcast with your host, Josh Marlowe. I am now joined by GoHeels writer Adam Lucas today. Adam, thank you for taking some time out of your Saturday to talk to me. How's it going today, man?
Josh, I appreciate you having me.
Look, you've the cliche thing to ask you is what would be your reaction, your first thoughts about Roy Williams' retirement. So I'm going to go in a different direction. You've been involved with some big-time moments with Carolina basketball under Roy Williams. Where does his retirement stack up with all the other memories you have?
Man, I mean, it's up there just because of what it signifies and how important it is for the program as a whole. I was fortunate enough to get a Coach Smith's retirement. Well, I don't know if fortunate's the right word, but I went to Coach Smith's retirement. That one felt a little different because that one just felt a little more shocking. This one seemed a little more sad. And that kind of turned out to be the tone of the press conference, and hopefully since that press conference, folks have had time to think about all the things Coach Williams accomplished and everything Carolina basketball has done in the last 18 years. You
mentioned his press conference, and I had a chance to listen to your podcast with Jones Angell, the Carolina Insider, and you mentioned that you would have got the impact or the feeling that he'd been fired the way he sat up there at that podium and talked about his retirement. What stood out to you about him in that press conference where he discussed his retirement?
I think the same thing that stuck out to everybody, which is when he said that he didn't feel like he was the right man for the job anymore. And for someone as competitive as Roy Williams to say that, that's just not in his nature. That's not a normal thing you would ever expect to hear come out of his mouth. I would have probably thought I'd hear him say, "Go Wolfpack," before I would hear that. And so that was sad to hear him say, and I thought Jen said it right. It was almost as if Coach Williams had fired himself, because really he was the only one who could do it. It seems like that's what he did.
He said some things confirmed his decision to retire. Do you think that had Walker Kessler stayed instead of transferring, he would have delayed this decision?
I think Coach Williams has got a long enough viewpoint that I don't think any one person is going to make him the larger issues that Walker Kessler's transfer speak to are something that is a truth about college basketball right now, and I think those larger issues played a role in Coach Williams deciding he was done. But I absolutely don't think he would sit there and go, well, if Walker Kessler would have stayed, I would have stayed. I just think it's a symptom of a larger thing going on with college basketball right now.
He's won 3 national championships at his alma mater, and his name is on the court at the Smith Center. Ultimately, how will Roy Williams be remembered in Chapel Hill and by college basketball as a whole?
Well, I think in Chapel Hill, we're going to have discussions for the rest of our Tar Heel fan lives about which era was more successful. Was it the Dean Smith era? Was it the Roy Williams era? Certainly, Coach Smith also accomplished quite a few things off the court, and that's always going to be part of his legacy. But, Coach Williams did quite a bit too, maybe not as noticeably, but when he came back, the program really wasn't in the same place in the community that it is now. And some of the first things he did were making sure that the players were part of the community, the Special Olympics clinics, the sign-in basketballs for charity, the holiday clinics. I mean, that was something Carolina basketball has never done, is open the doors for one day and let kids come in and hang out with the players and the coaches. That's not something Coach Smith would have been comfortable with. And for Coach Williams to do that, I felt like really kind of reestablished Carolina basketball with its fans and the people who love it. So he won, which of course everyone knows. He won at an almost unprecedented clip. But he also was very important to Carolina off the court, and we hadn't even gotten into what he did for the Carolina family, which was not in the same place then as it is now. And he's put that Carolina family back in a place where it's something that every letterman, every former player is proud of.
As tough as dealing with his retirement, Bubba Cunningham then met with the media later that night to discuss how Carolina was going to go in the search for the next basketball head coach. And Bubba Cunningham has displayed the type of leadership that gives us the confidence he'll make the right decision. With that in mind, how much pressure is on Bubba to, quote-unquote, get it right when he hires the next basketball coach?
I mean, you're hiring someone to coach one of the most successful programs in all of sports. So I would say a substantial amount of pressure. I don't think it's a big coincidence that over at Duke, Kevin White decided he was going to retire before Mike Krzyzewski retired. That's something you do because you don't want to have to make that choice. Now Bubba Cunningham is going to have to make that choice, but he's hired plenty of coaches. He's got an incredible network in college athletics and really athletics beyond. So he's more than capable of making those phone calls, doing those interviews, and figuring out who's the best fit.
He stressed that the university will work quickly to hire the next coach. How does he do that and correctly identify the right guy?
Well, I think he made the good point that it's not like it's any big secret who the best coaches are. I mean, this isn't, you're not hiring a coach at Old Dominion, and you've got to really parse through some of these mid-level coaches and the young up-and-comers and try to figure out who's the best fit. And the best fit at Carolina are the best coaches in the country for college basketball. So that's a pretty short list. And I do think timing is important because in the era that we're living in with college basketball, you take a week without a coach, you've got hundreds of schools calling your players, and you're not able to call other players, and that can put you pretty far behind. But that being said, you don't pick a head coach for hopefully the next 20 to 30 years based on the 2021-22 roster because you're hoping to make a decision that's important for the program for decades to come.
There's a greater chance potentially right now that the next head coach won't have ties to UNC. If that's the case, what is the trait that potential candidate must have to succeed in this job?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the percentage chance is that could be the case. But whatever the percentage chance, if it's 1%, that person's got to realize that they're not just coaching a basketball team, they're coaching Carolina basketball. And those two things are not necessarily the same. You've got to have all that technical savvy that all the coaches on this list of best coaches that we're talking about would have. But you've also got to be willing to have people explain to you what Carolina basketball is, who's important to it, why they're important, what the Carolina family is, how you maintain that. It's not as simple as just putting a hashtag on your Twitter and you're done. You've got to actively cultivate it. You've got to actively care about it. And that's not something you can really fake. That's why Roy Williams was always so good at it. It was just something that came natural to him. If it is something that doesn't come natural to the next person, that person's going to have to be willing to learn about it and also care about it because I think people will see through it if it's not genuine.
You've had Matt Doherty on the Carolina Insider podcast, and I've been looking up to have him here on my podcast. So we both have a mutual respect for Matt Doherty, the man and the coach. With that being said, how important is it for the program to avoid going through another Matt Doherty situation?
Well, it's obviously very important because that was a difficult time. I do think whoever ends up getting the job will probably study that situation and figure out what were some of the missteps there by everybody involved and how can they not be repeated. because you do have that fairly recent history right there to look at. Coach Doherty's been pretty open about what he feels like he got wrong. I think some of the other parties there are pretty accessible and could pretty easily explain some of the mistakes they made. So I think you've got to be willing to learn from that. And I have to think anybody who would be willing to take on the head coaching job at North Carolina would certainly want to invest the time to learn about that.
A couple more and I'll get you out of here, Adam. When Dean Smith retired, he was still attending practices and coming to the occasional games. Can we expect the same from Roy Williams?
That's a great question. Nobody really knows. I certainly think he'll be around, but I think he probably will want to talk to the new coach and find out kind of how they're feeling about it. If they're uncomfortable with it, certainly he will do it. If they wouldn't mind him coming by, then I think that's something he wouldn't mind doing. But I also think it's going to be hard for him. In those first few months of the fall, October and November, when practices start, to not be out there at center court with his team around him. So it wouldn't shock me if he doesn't want to be around for that part until it just gets a little more comfortable. But I wouldn't interpret that as him being angry about something or not wanting to be part of Carolina basketball. I just think it's emotionally difficult for him to not be a coach. And especially to not be a coach on the first day of practice, one of his very favorite days of the year. That's going to be tough.
You were around when Roy Williams was hired back in 2003. Can you explain what that moment was like and what Tar Heel fans like myself are in store for as we await the next hire?
Well, when he was hired, it was almost like a revival. I think sort of history has rewritten it as though, well, of course he was the hire. Back in 2003, there were a lot of people, maybe even a majority of people, who didn't want Dick Bedore to call Roy Williams because they felt like Coach Williams had embarrassed Carolina the first time in 2000, didn't want to give him the chance to do it again. That was a difficult call for Dick Bedore to make because the only person whose reputation was on the line was Dick Bedore. Roy Williams was still going to be one of the best coaches in the country no matter what. So he made that call. Of course, Coach Williams came home that night that he came to the Swift Center. Just incredible with fans and students lining the road up to the Swift Center to cheer on the car. I mean, he shows up in a car driven by Dean Smith. It doesn't get much more Carolina than that. And it'll be interesting to see how this next transition goes. I don't expect it to be quite like that because there just isn't quite as much pain in the Carolina basketball world right now as there was in 03. You had no NCAA tournament appearances in the last 2 years. You had players and just all sorts of unrest. That's not where we are right now. So I don't feel like Carolina's got to bring in a savior. They've just got to bring in somebody who understands Carolina basketball and is able to move it forward into 2021 and beyond. I
mentioned that you write for GoHeels.com and co-host the Carolina Insider podcast. Where can Tar Heel fans find all of your great Tar Heel coverage?
As you said, Joshua, GoHeels.com. The Carolina Insider is on Spotify and on the Apple Podcast Store, and I'm on Twitter at @JAdamLucas.
All right, Adam, I do want to thank you again for taking some out of your holiday weekend to come on and talk about Roy Williams' retirement and where Carolina basketball goes from here. So thank you, and we'll talk down the line, sir.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. There you go, guys. That's Adam Lucas, as he said, from GoHeels.com and the co-host of the Carolina Insider podcast, coming on to talk about Roy Williams and where this program goes as we try to find the next head coach to lead this program through another period of hopefully prolonged success. So with that, do want to get you guys out of here. Before we let you go, get you guys over to the website, HeelToughBlog.com. We got even more content up there right now. You can go back and check out the article I wrote about what Bubba Cunningham is looking for as he tries to identify the right guy to take over in Chapel Hill. I have my thank you letter posted for Roy Williams, and also me and Anthony sat down and wrote through the candidates we believe are in the mix to get the job to be Carolina's basketball's next head coach. You can find all that great content on the website. We'll also have some football and baseball coverage coming in the coming days, but as you can expect right now, everything will be driven by Carolina basketball. I also encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on every major podcasting feed, most notably Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Podcasts. Give us a like, review me as the host, review Anthony as the co-host when he's co-hosting with me. But most importantly, I want you guys to subscribe. That we get every great podcast, every great interview like we just had with Adam Lucas right there in your podcast library. Well, with that, I want to thank Adam once again for coming on this Easter weekend to talk a little Carolina basketball. We thank you guys for listening, and as always, go Tar Heels.